care if you are a man or a woman, you are young or old man. They're killers, they're murderers. What they did is can be forgiven.
We don't know what's going on. No one's talking to us. We can't get in contact with anyone. Just want answers.
We do know there are a number of unaccounted for Americans. Obviously, we're greatly concerned for their safety and security.
Israel has the right to defend itself and its people. Full stop.
Hi, I'm Scott McFarlane in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Israel has ordered a complete siege on Gaza as fighting intensifies with Hamas. This halts deliveries of food, water, fuel, and supplies to the territory as the two sides are trading fire after Hamas launched a surprise attack Saturday. It's estimated nearly 1,600 Israelis and Palestinians have died. And President Biden said in a statement today at least 11 American citizens are among those killed. Israel said it has largely contained or gained control of its southern towns, but militants claim to be holding more than 100 Israeli hostages inside Gaza. The Biden administration is pledging to support Israel.
Right now, what we are focused on, and what we have been focused on since the minute this broke out, is providing support and solidarity between the United States and Israel.
The only things we've said to Israel are that we're here, we've got your back, we want to make sure that you have the support that you need, we want to make sure that you have the assistance that you need.
National Security Council Coordinator for Strategic Communications, John Kirby, joins us now. Admiral, we appreciate that. How soon until the White House, the administration knows how many Americans are hostage and where they're being held?
Well, hopefully we'll know very, very soon. We're working very closely with Israeli officials to try to get that kind of fingertip feel. We do know there are a number of unaccounted for Americans. Obviously, we're greatly concerned for their safety and security. I mean, we have to assume, or I should say accept, the grim possibility that some of these Americans may be among the hostages, but we just don't know that right now.
Ultimately, there may have to be a negotiation to extract these hostages. Is there a plan in place for that?
We will do, as you've seen us do in the past, in fact, just recently, in the last few weeks, do what we need to do to get Americans held hostage or wrongfully detained overseas back home with their families where they belong. So I can't get ahead of where we are in the process here, so we don't even know if or how many Americans might be in that situation right now. But under President Biden, we will always do what we have to do to try to get Americans home with their families where they belong, and we'll just have to see where this goes.
As this escalates, Admiral, how concerned is the administration about conflict breaking out on the northern border with Lebanon?
We're deeply concerned about that. We've already seen some rocket attacks coming from Hezbollah, from Lebanon, across that northern border. We're in contact with Israeli officials as they work through their own process there of defending that border. But certainly that's a concern. With
the escalation accelerating, under what circumstances would any more U.S. troops be deployed in addition to the carrier that's been put in the western part of the Mediterranean? We will always do what we need to do to look after our national security interests, defend our interests and our security commitments around the world, and that includes in that part of the world, and that's why you saw a carrier strike group now moving into the eastern Mediterranean. But we're always going to look after our national security interests. There's no plans to put U.S. boots on the ground here, but again, we're always going to look after our interests. How close are we to that point? I mean, are there discussions, ancillary or preliminary discussions beginning? Right now, we're focused on making sure Israel has what it needs to defend itself against this very complex series of reprehensible terrorist attacks that have visited just unspeakable violence on the Israeli people. So we're focused on making sure that they're going to get what they need to defend themselves. What type of aid do they need? What additional things does Israel need from the United States? Look, I think in the early days here, you're going to see really the most acute need is going to be on weapons capabilities, whether it's interceptor missiles or artillery rounds, those kinds of things, the kinds of munitions that they're expending in these early days here. That's what we're going to stay focused with them. But look, it's going to be up to the Israelis to determine, what additional assistance they need and what the United States can help provide for them. We're going to stay lashed up with them as we have been going forward so that we can be as responsive to those requests in as near real time as possible. To get Israel munitions or financial aid, does America need a Congress to approve that? Because, of course, Congress is paralyzed indefinitely.
Well, of course you need Congress to approve security assistance to foreign nations. I would remind, though, that we already have existing authorities and existing appropriations that we already can spend against to support Israel here in these early days. But certainly, if we need to go back to Congress and ask for additional funding and authorities, we'll be happy to do that. We will absolutely do that. We are already in touch with members of Congress about the situation, what we know, what we're doing to help Israel, and we'll keep them fully informed.
And the estimate of the death toll among Americans more than doubled from this time yesterday. Why hasn't the country heard from the president today? Why is the president not addressing the nation at a time of true international crisis?
Yeah, the president's been focused very keenly today on staying up to date on what's going on. He had a key meeting this morning with his national security team. Those meetings will continue. He will be speaking to foreign leaders this afternoon across Europe to make sure that we're all aligned, that we're all seeing the same things, that we're focused on helping support Israel. So he's going to stay completely focused on this crisis, as you might expect.
Admiral, what is the White House hearing from Prime Minister Netanyahu? What type of requests or what type of updates are you all getting?
Well, the president spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu again yesterday. I would fully anticipate that additional conversations with the Prime Minister will occur at that level. Clearly, we are in touch with the Israelis on all kinds of different levels, at the cabinet level, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and beyond. In fact, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke to his counterpart today. So there's lots of different conversations happening with the Israelis so that we can, again, make sure that we know what they need and that we're doing what we can to provide those needs. Again, largely in these early days, you can expect it to be really more in the realm of munitions and weapons capabilities.
Back home, what's the impact? I assume some threat levels have been elevated or some detections have been elevated. What's the threat posture back here?
The president has directed the Department of Homeland Security, federal law enforcement, and the intel community to work with local communities throughout the United States, particularly to be aware of and to help prevent any potential threats to Jewish centers of life and culture throughout the country. So we're watching this very, very closely. Again, I don't want to get into law enforcement or intelligence matters, but we can't just assume that there aren't potentially going to be anti-Semitic threats as a result of all this. That's why we've taken that proactive step, preventative step, to work closely with local authorities from the federal level with them to make sure that we can keep an eye on, again, Jewish community centers.
You've done a lot of interviews today. You're doing tireless work there at the White House. I did hear you say earlier that Iran is complicit in this attack. What did you mean by that?
I mean that they have had long-standing support for Hamas now, many, many years. Other terrorist networks as well, but certainly Hamas, resourcing, training, capabilities. So in that regard, clearly they're complicit in what happened here over the last couple of days. What I also said was, as we look at the intelligence and the evidence, and we are, even today, even as you and I are speaking, we haven't seen any specific participation by Iran in these particular sets of attacks over the last 24, 36 hours. And our Israeli counterparts have said publicly exactly the same thing. They're looking as well, but we just haven't seen any actual physical evidence that they were involved specifically in these attacks.
Now, Republicans say you've seen enough to freeze up those funds that were unfrozen towards Iran a few days ago.
Well, we can take an action to freeze those funds whenever we want. I don't have a policy decision to speak to with respect to that account at this time. But again, we're going to look very closely at what happened here, and we're going to certainly monitor to see what role Iran might have taken, what role they might have played in these particular attacks. Again, we just haven't seen that.
Lastly, is the two-state solution off the table now? Something we've talked about for generations. Does this wipe it off?
The president still believes in the promise of a two-state solution, in peace and justice for the Israeli people as well as for the Palestinian people. And the president knows that Hamas doesn't speak for the Palestinian people. They don't speak for all the Palestinian people and all their aspirations. So in the United States, there will continue to be a support for a viable two-state solution, which the president still believes is possible, but it's going to take a lot of leadership on all sides here. And we recognize that right now, the focus is rightly on making sure that the Israeli people can defend themselves against these terrorist attacks.
At the White House North Lawn, Admiral Kirby, thank you very much.
You bet.
And we'll bring you more on the developing war in the Middle East after the break. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. We continue to follow the latest strikes in both Israel and Gaza after Hamas's assault there Saturday. Here's some of the damage in Israel sustained after being struck by a rocket. You can see bombed out cars and ripped up fences. And take a look at the horizon this morning at sunrise in Gaza. You see the plumes of smoke as Israel carries out retaliatory strikes. Joining us now to talk more, Elise Labott and Major Garrett. Elise is founder and editor of Zivi Media. She has extensive history covering conflict in the Middle East. Major is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent. Major, I'm going to start with you. So what happens next? What happens next that may galvanize more attacks and more terrorism?
So we don't know exactly what's going to happen next, but we have a sense of what will probably happen next. Israel has already struck Gaza. It will continue to strike Gaza. The only question is, when does the ground assault begin? Because when the prime minister declares war, that means victory. That doesn't mean defending Israel against rocket attacks or terrorists coming through holes and fences that they create in a surprise maneuver. That means defeating Hamas. What does that mean? That means going into Gaza, a place in which Hamas hides itself among civilians intentionally, rockets from the sky, ground forces, block by block, bitter urban conflict, increasing the possibility of three things. Israeli military personnel being shot and killed in those sniper attacks, and hostages. There are already 150 hostages. So that's the military side of it. Then the psychological warfare side. There will be the hostages, American possibly, and Israelis, paraded in front of camera. Hamas has threatened to maybe execute them on camera. All of this will be digested by the world, Western and otherwise. Hamas will use that for galvanizing propagandistic effect. Israel fears that enormously, doesn't want to be compromised or deterred because of the fear of that, but it will be a calculation nonetheless. We are, in the next 48 to 72 hours, heading to some very grim realities and visuals.
What strikes so many people is not just the magnitude of death and hostage taking, it's the images. It's the visceral nature of what people are seeing. Is that by design? Is that something that was strategized?
Oh, it's very much by design. I mean, and now in the age of social media, when you see these videos of these families running for their lives or being kidnapped and put into a truck and taken away or slaughtered, and you see, everyone's putting a video online. I mean, it's whole, as the prime minister said, whole families being killed in an instant. It's very much for that shock value. And we've heard it before. This is, and when you look at the equivalent in terms of population, this is the Israeli 9/11. And population-wise, it's about 33,000 Americans being killed. It's a big shock to the Israeli psyche right now.
One of the IDF spokesmen said today that more Jewish people died Saturday than since the Holocaust.
Yep.
We need to pause for a second and think about that. More Jewish people died Saturday than since the Holocaust. That is something Israel can never forget. And this is also something that will not just speak to Israel's security future. Hamas made a direct attack on Israel's economic future, its ability to attract foreign investment, its ability to suggest itself as a place of safety, of business, of commerce, of efficacy. All of this is now up for grabs in a way that has shocked Israel to its core.
One of the things John Kirby mentioned was that there are hostages, he knows it. There's Americans, he knows it. They don't know how many, they don't know where. What is it like trying to extract hostages from this type of warfare? I mean, is this different than a different type of POW mission?
Oh, it's going to be really difficult, and they know that. And you've seen the Israelis, one hostage. When you remember Gilad Shalit, it took them 5 years, but they never gave up trying to get them. There are going to be some real difficult conversations, and the Israeli soldiers that are going to be going in to rescue these people once they can get the intelligence about trying to find out where they are.
But they'd go in for the Americans. The Israelis would go in.
They'll go in
to
for
be
all
determined.
of them. They're not gonna. They're gonna go in for all of them. They're not. They're not gonna say we're gonna go for one Israeli hostage and we're not going to go for the Americans. They're going to try and go for all of those hostages, and some of those hostages are soldiers. But you've seen that, this is a very delicate situation right now because Hamas has said, for every Israeli strike, we're going to kill some of your hostages. And so how do you make that calculation? I don't think it's going to deter, and we've been talking about what's going to happen. Not only is we thinking about a ground invasion, but I don't think it's impossible to imagine that you're going to see a wholesale reoccupation by the Israelis of Gaza. This is what the chatter is in Israel right now. This is what the Israelis, after leaving in 2005 and saying we want to disengage from Gaza, we want to disengage from the Palestinians and moving in that direction. You're talking about a reoccupation of the territory because, as Major said, this is, the kind of carnage that we've seen is unparalleled in Israeli history, and this is going to mean a response unlike anything. This is a massive game changer.
And that's only if things stay as they are. We don't know what Hezbollah is going to do in Lebanon to the north. We don't know what Israel is contemplating with Iran. All of this has many other dimensions, as yet unexplored, almost all of them lethal and destabilizing.
What do you think this means for Netanyahu? Either the intelligence failure that clearly occurred or his response so far?
Mm-hmm. Well, there is an existential threat to Israel right now, the largest since 1973. So there will be a rallying, and there's already talk of a unity government. The Prime Minister has asked for it. Those outside the government have agreed to participate in a temporary unity government. But there are extremist right-wing nationalistic factions in the existing Netanyahu coalition that want to occupy all of the West Bank, make that settlements for Israelis. That's destabilizing to the entire Palestinian equation. Netanyahu's got to wrestle those forces to the ground if he's going to have any kind of functioning unity government of purpose and resoluteness. So he has some decisions to make. Yes, there'll be a rallying, but one of the reasons this has gotten to the place it's gotten is because this is the most nationalistic government Israel has ever had. And it's of deep and abiding concern to Palestinians who are not members of Hamas. And we have to distinguish between the two. And Netanyahu is going to have to make some choices.
I don't know that his government can survive. I mean, look, Netanyahu has been the security prime minister, right? That this is the guy, this is really his only value, that he's going to be able to deliver security for Israel, and largely he has. I mean, there have been skirmishes over the last many years.
But nothing like this.
But nothing like this. If Netanyahu, the Israelis are saying to themselves, if Netanyahu can't protect us right now, who can? And I think there's really a gut check right now among the Israelis who have already been going through he has really destroyed the whole fabric of society during his reign, and this move to the right, and this, there's been not just about the Palestinians, but the role of religious in the country, the role of the Supreme Court, the role of the Orthodox. The Israelis were already having, a lot of existential issues right now. This is only going to add to that, and I'm not sure that his government survives.
Elise Labott, Major Garrett, great insights. Sadly, we'll have more to unpack later in the week. Coming up next, the House of Representatives poised to select a speaker this week. As early as this week, a look at new CBS News polling on what kind of speaker the American public prefers. You're streaming America Decides.
That's a decision by the conference. I'll allow the conference to make whatever decision. Whether I'm speaker or not, I'm a member of this body. I know what history has had, and I can lead in any position it is.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was just one of several instances of California Republican Congressman Kevin McCarthy refusing to rule out the possibility of running again for his former job of House Speaker. Meanwhile, new CBS News polling reveals Americans want the next speaker to prioritize working across the aisle with Democrats. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. You have some numbers that jumped out at me. That was the first one. The polling shows that it's not just Republicans, but Republicans who are surveyed that like to see the speaker do both parties' business.
Yes. And now, that doesn't mean people get what they want, right? But what you do want to see is, or look at, is these differences between the MAGA Republicans in the rank and file, people who identify with the movement, and people in the Republican Party who say that they are not part of MAGA. because that, I think, is reflective of some of what you're seeing going on in the House, right? So you get a majority of Republicans saying, yeah, they would like to see the next speaker work across the aisle. But that number drops to less than half, to 43%. If you look at the MAGA Republicans, and then it goes back up again to two-thirds, over two-thirds, if you look at the Republicans who are not MAGA. Well, does that define then in the rank and file what we're seeing in the House and some of those splits in terms of what they want? Yes, in many ways it does, Scott.
But at the same time, they also do support some very Republican priorities, including impeachment.
Indeed. So you have a majority of Republicans saying they would like to see the next speaker try to impeach Joe Biden. That is very different from the rest of the non-Republicans in the country, the Democrats, the independents, who are way lower on that, 72 all the way down to 30% who say that. So that is a difference. Again, Republicans get to choose the speaker, and that's obviously a priority for them. But you do want to understand that difference and that disconnect, if you will.
It's a really interesting binary choice that's forming here. We have Jim Jordan, the ardent Trump loyalist who has Trump's endorsement, running from the House Judiciary Committee without leadership experience and without a fundraising base. You have Steve Scalise, the House Majority Leader, who does have leadership experience, does have a fundraising base, but doesn't have the Trump endorsement. How does that factor in based on what you saw?
I wanted to know what that Trump factor was for people. And so I asked, should the next speaker be loyal to Donald Trump? And you do see a majority of Republicans, in particular MAGA Republicans. But it goes from just over half among all, and then all the way up to over 8 and 10 among the MAGA Republicans. And that next speaker should be loyal, should show loyalty to Donald Trump. And I think you take a step back, that just reflects, again, the significance of him in the party. He's obviously the front runner for the nomination for the president, but that his impact on all of this cannot be understated.
Did you get a sense, or did you have the ability to measure how strong these viewpoints are, how devoted these Republicans who are surveyed are to the idea of bipartisanship? Is it a temporary dynamic or something they may want in the long term?
I think the difference is, what do you define as bipartisanship? And what we often see is bipartisanship means you get the other side to come to our side. So sometimes there's that dynamic. And look, there is also a prevailing sentiment among people that the parties should at least try to work together, should at least try to see some common ground. And that is something that is a consistent finding across polling about Congress, across polling about everything. The polarized wings of the parties, not so much.
Can you extrapolate this a little bit, Anthony? Does any of this bleed over into 2024? Do you think that same dynamic's going to be there for the Republican primary voters when the presidential primaries begin?
Yes, because we've already seen in the primaries where the folks who identify as MAGA, not only are they more for the former president, but they look across the aisle, or the metaphorical aisle, and they see Democrats not just as the opposition, but as enemies, as threat to their way of life. And some Democrats see Republicans the same way. As long as you have that dynamic, and that's a prevailing dynamic in a primary, then that sets the expectation for a candidate who's going to treat the opposing party the same way. And that leads to more polarization, very frankly.
Those respondents should get comfortable chairs. It's going to be a while, potentially, till a new speaker is selected. The process does begin tonight into tomorrow. Anthony Salvanta, good work. Thanks.
Thanks, Scott.
And that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.